Welcome back, everybody. Now we're going to finish up talking about our exotic livestock species that we're looking at this week. So the last of our camelids is the camel itself, which is really the Arabian camel, also known as a dromedary. There are another type of camel called a Bactrian camel. Those camels have two humps instead, and they're not as closely related to this one. So for the dromedary camel, it was one of the earliest domesticated animals, and it actually hasn't even been found naturally in the wild for nearly 2,000 years now, although there is a feral population in Australia, and up until 1905 there was a feral population in the southwestern US. It was probably first domesticated in the Arabian Peninsula or Somalia, somewhere between 4000 BC and 1400 BC. And it's been living with humans ever since. So the key thing about this particular camel, the Arabian camel, is it has one hump, not two like the Bactrian one. That hump can store up to 80 pounds of fat, which a camel can break down into both water and energy when they don't have access to either food or water. So this is what gave camels their legendary ability to travel up to 100 miles through the desert or to go 17 days without water. They also have expandable blood cells that will swell to store water, and they store a lot of water in their rumen as well. You can also drink it very quickly, so they can kind of recharge once they're dehydrated. So obviously this is a very hardy animal, and you're probably thinking with the desert, they're really good at surviving extreme heat, which is true, but they're also good on the other hand, and it does get very cold in the desert at night, so that makes sense that they can survive that extreme cold at the same time. They will eat just about any vegetation. That includes thorny plants, twigs, and plants that have a really high salt content that other animals couldn't eat for that reason. They're mainly used for transportation, so they can be ridden or they can be used as pack animals, and camels can be trained to kneel down because they do have tough leathery knees that allow them to do that, and that makes getting things on and off their back much easier. They're also used for meat, for dairy, and for fiber. So for their meat, it's very lean meat. It's said to be somewhat in between a beef and a pork in flavor. And their milk also is used a lot for dairy in these areas. And camel milk has 2% milk fat, so about half the fat of cow's milk. It has a creamy white color and a sweet, slightly salty aftertaste. And it sells at about $18 a pint, so there's a pretty good market for it. It can also be used to make lip balm and lotion. There's actually 7 camel dairies in the US. And then one more use for camels is they can also be ridden by border guards. And in a lot of countries that you do have a lot of deserts along the border, that is how they are patrolled. Couple other adaptations they have, because they are out in these sandy areas all the time. They have a double row of thick eyelashes, and they have hair around their ears, and both of those things help keep sand out. And they can also close their nostrils if they need to block sand from getting in that way. In this case, the males are going to be called bulls and the females are cows, so they do have different gender terms than our alpacas and our llamas. And pretty much all of the species we talk about from here on will be bulls and cows. Male dromedaries also have what's called a soft palate or a dula, and they inflate that during mating season, and it hangs out the side of their mouth, and that helps to attract females. So some people mistake that for a tongue, but it's actually a mating gesture. And they do have a 13-month gestation, so a little bit longer than alpacas and llamas. They can live up to 40 years old. So that's the dromedary. Our next animal that we're going to look at is the American bison. Some people call these buffalo, but that's really a misnomer that came from the first European settlers who thought that they looked a lot like the water buffalo that they had seen. This is the largest land animal in North America. Males are over 2,000 pounds and 6 feet tall at their shoulder. They are also in the bovine family, along with cattle, and you can cross them with taurine cattle to make hybrids called beefalos. These guys are native to the US, although it is thought that they might have actually come over from Siberia over the Bering Strait. And they were used historically by native tribes for meat, hides, and a number of different byproducts, all of which they can still be used for today. They were also hunted to almost extinction in the 1880s, and now there are about several 100,000 in the U.S., and most of those are on private farms, although we do have a few wild herds. We started farming them sometime in the early 1900s. You can make the argument that bison were never truly domesticated. They really don't like being handled, and when they're crowded, they become really tense and they're more inclined to panic than other livestock. So they have to be handled very slowly and very carefully at a distance using corrals and other features of the environment. It's better if they never really see humans in the handling process at all. They also need a lot of space. A herd of 20 bison needs around 60 acres to roam around, and they can jump a 5 to 6 foot fence. The good thing is that they won't unless they feel either threatened or they're hungry. So as long as you keep them happy, they're usually okay. They can also be dangerous because not only are they this huge size and they have those horns, but they also can reach speeds of up to 35 to 40 miles per hour and sustain that over miles. So they can outrun just about anybody. They have a very distinctively shaped body. It's very broad in the front with that large hump over their shoulder area, and then it tapers towards the back. And they have a skinnier tail with a little poof of fur on the end. Their horns do always point out and then upwards like this. And they're always that kind of brown color. It tends to look a little bit lighter brown in the summertime. It looks a little bit darker as it gets thicker in the winter, and then they will shed that out in the spring. These guys are very efficient at turning roughage into lean meat. They don't store fat the same way that cattle do, so it results in a healthier red meat, and it's actually some of the highest protein and lowest calorie meat available. In terms of cuts, they're pretty much the exact same cuts you would get from beef cattle, just leaner. And they're very hardy and self-reliant. You really don't need to feed them much as long as they have plenty of pasture available. They do eat about 3% of their body weight per day, but most of that they will scavenge. If you do need to feed them hay, it doesn't have to be the highest quality. And they're very herd-oriented, so it's really not a good idea to try to separate bison from their herd. They also do tend to be susceptible to a lot of parasites and diseases that are spread by other livestock, so they do need to live in a single species herd just with other bison. Next on our list is another bovine, the domestic yak. And these guys came from the wild yak, and they were domesticated in the Himalayas in the region of Tibet, Mongolia, China, and Siberia, somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 years ago. They're still mostly farmed in that region of the world, but they are becoming more popular in other areas, and they were introduced to the U.S. in the 1780s, so they've been here a while. These guys are very well adapted for high altitudes. They do require some shelter, but not to the extent that cattle do, and they do better in northern U.S. states. They are both browsers and grazers, so they will eat grass like cattle, but they will also eat woodier vegetation like goats, and they do require a little bit better nutrition than bison do. Their cows are much smaller than their bulls, so their cows tend to be between 500 and 800 pounds. The bulls will be somewhere between 1,500 and 1,700 pounds. They're very compactly built, and they have thick bodies with humped shoulders. They have woolly coats that hang down with luxurious forelocks that come out between their ears, and they have horse-like tails. When their fur hangs down, it forms almost this little skirt around their body that sometimes will go all the way down to the ground. They come in 5 recognized colors. One is black, which is all black with a gray nose. Another is imperial, which is all black with a black nose. Then they come in a royal color, which is a lot like a Holstein cow with patches of black and white. Golden, which is a gold color. and then trim, which is black with white markings on their head, feet, and tail. They also come in two coat types. There's regular and there's extra woolly that has a longer, thicker coat. These yaks are slow to mature. They do take 6 years to reach puberty. So it does take a while to establish a herd, but their life expectancy is around 25 years. And they can also be crossbred with bison and with taurine cattle. They're very versatile, multi-purpose animals, and their meat is very similar to bison in that it's high protein, low fat, low calorie. Their meat can go for over $10 a pound, and it's supposed to be one of the best meats for making jerky. It's starting to gain popularity in the US, but we still have many more bison farms at this point than we have yak farms. They also produce a high butterfat milk that makes really rich cheese and yogurt. And they have a double coat of fiber that can be used for a number of different products. The outer fiber is extremely strong, so it can be used to make tents, outerwear, rope, rugs, and blankets. The inner fiber is very soft and silky and more similar to cashmere. Either way, their fiber is warmer than sheep's wool, and it has none of that greasy lanolin in it, again. Traditionally, nomadic tribes also use them as pack animals. They use their hides for clothing, and they burn their dung for fuel. And because these have been domesticated for so long, they are animals that have very gentle temperaments. They're intelligent, they're inquisitive, and as long as you handle them from the time that they're calves, they tend to be very friendly and easy to work with. And the last bovine that we're going to look at is the water buffalo. So there's actually two types of domesticated water buffalo that both came from the wild Asian water buffalo. So there's a swamp variety and a river variety. Both of these were tamed around 2500 BC in the Middle East. There are also wild African water buffalo, usually called Cape buffalo, but those haven't been domesticated like these Asian ones have. So the swamp type of water buffalo is mainly found in China, Southeast Asia, the Philippines, and Indonesia, and those are uniquely suited to hotter climates. They're usually used as draft and meat animals, and they have broad, wide horns, lighter colored legs, and large hooves. Most of what you're going to see in the U.S. are river buffalo, and those originated in India and Pakistan, and they have been bred more for dairy production, although they can also provide meat and power. River buffalo have more curled horns. They tend to come in a lot more than your typical bison horns or yak horns, and they are a little bit darker in color. They hold their heads higher than swamp relatives, and they are the type that is preferred for milk production. So there are large herds of these in Bulgaria, Romania, and Italy, and this breed is really important in countries with high poverty levels because these water buffalo provide meat, milk, and pulling power for the people who live there. They can also be ridden as well. So these are known as the living tractor of the East. They are in the bovine family, but they can't interbreed with yaks, bison, or cattle. They stand between 4 and 5 feet tall at the shoulder, and they have really large feet with splayed hooves, which allow them to navigate in muddy areas. Their face is really long and narrow, with pretty small ears and those large curling horns. They have very sparse coats. The adults hardly have any hair on their body compared to our other bovines. And because of that, they're going to do best in southern states that have warmer temperatures. So the first U.S. water buffalo farm was started in 1975, and water buffalo milk actually makes up somewhere between 5 and 15% of the world's dairy supply. So some of the benefits of water buffalo milk is it's really high in milk solids, and it has 8% butterfat compared to the 4% in cow's milk. So it's actually healthier in many ways compared to traditional cow's milk because it has 11% higher protein, 9% more calcium, and 37% more iron than cow's milk. It's also lower in cholesterol, even though it's higher in fat. They produce about 4 gallons a day per buffalo, and it's usually used to make cheeses such as mozzarella, ricotta, and scamorza. And the Italian mozzarella di bufala is really popular, and that's made from this milk. So Americans actually import 90,000 pounds of that a year. Water buffalo milk is also excellent for making butter and yogurt because of its high fat content. And it's used to make ghee that's used in India, which is kind of a clarified butter product. Meat from these young water buffaloes is very lean, it's lightly marbled, and when cooked it's said to look and taste exactly like comparable cuts of beef. It contains about a quarter of the fat of beef and half the cholesterol, so again, it's a little bit healthier product. These animals can also be used to control aquatic weeds, and they really like to wallow in mud, so you really kind of need water on the property in order to raise water buffalo, a pond or something that they can wade into. They're even-tempered, they're very laid back, and supposed to be very easy to train, and they can thrive on pretty marginal feeds. They don't need the best nutrition. They also have very strong mothering instincts and tend to have very few problems calving. So this is an industry that's definitely grown a lot and will continue to grow, especially if the demand for their dairy stays high. So the last couple of species that we're going to take a look at are in the cervid family, along with deer. And of course, white-tailed deer can be farmed as well, but it's actually more common to farm American elk or reindeer. So those are the ones that we're going to take a look at. So the American elk is a native North American species, and U.S. farmers have raised them from about the mid-1800s. They are somewhere between 4 and 6 feet tall, and their antlers usually tower a full 5 feet above their body. They have the thickest antlers of all the cervids, all of the ones in that deer family. Bull elks can weigh anywhere between 700 and 1,100 pounds, while the females only reach somewhere between 500 and 700 pounds, and females are usually referred to as cows here. So that's where it's a little different from deer. They don't really call them bucks and does. They're going to still call them bulls and cows. They have a distinctive white rump patch and a light tan coat in the summer. Their head, legs, and mane tend to be more of a deep chocolate brown color. And their whole coat gets a little bit darker and thicker in the wintertime, with gray covering the lower part of the body, and then a lot of that is shed in the spring. These are known as intermediate browsers. They eat twigs and tree branches, and they will feed on things like aspen tree bark because it has a high copper content. If you have them on a farm, feeding them grasses and legumes should be enough to get all of the nutrients that they need. They do need twice as many calories in the summer as they do in the winter. As your pasture quality starts to go down, they do need quality hay and supplements to make sure that you're meeting their nutritional needs. They're very hardy animals and disease resistant, but they are susceptible to some of the same diseases as cattle, so you don't want to keep them in the same areas. And they can crossbreed with other types of deer such as sika and red deer. Like all cervid males, elk can become very aggressive during the rut, so that's something to keep in mind if you're breeding them. And there's a lot of different uses for these animals. One is for their velvet. So bulls produce velvet every year on their horns. It's this outer layer. And an average 2-year-old will grow about 9 pounds of velvet, where a mature bull, somewhere in the 7 to 8-year-old range, will produce around 30 to 40 pounds of velvet per year. There's a big demand for these velvet products. They're used as supplements, especially in traditional Chinese medicine, and they're also used in pet foods. So that's one area of the market that they can be raised for. Elk meat is also considered to be sort of a luxury venison. It's lean, it's low in fat and cholesterol. So a lot of people will buy the meat in the store, or many elk farms also host guided trophy hunts. Their leather is very soft but durable, so it can be used to make boots, gloves, other clothing. And their antlers can be used for a number of different things, including jewelry, art, decorative accessories. And unlike horns, antlers grow back every year, so the animal does not have to be harvested in order to use those. They are predominantly grazers, just like cattle, and you can typically feed them pretty much the exact same way you'd feed a beef cow and handle them in the same way too. So people who are already used to farming cattle, it wouldn't be a stretch for them to farm American elk. And then for our last exotic livestock species, we're going to take a look at reindeer. So these are the same species as caribou. We usually call them caribou if they're in the wilds. They're called reindeer when they're domesticated. And it is the most widely domesticated deer species. So in that cervid family, it's most common that you'll find these on a farm. Domestication began about 3,000 years ago in the Arctic Circle, so mostly in the areas of Russia, Scandinavia, northern Alaska, and Canada. And at first they were probably used as decoys to attract wild deer so that hunters could kill them. And now they are used more for both an attraction around Christmas time as well as their meat. So these guys weigh somewhere between 180 and 600 pounds. Both the males and females grow horns, and compared to their body size, they have the largest and heaviest antlers of all deer species. A male's antlers can be up to 51 inches long. A female's antlers are a lot shorter at around 20 inches. Reindeer are covered in hair from their nose all the way to the bottom of their hooves, and that hair is much thicker than the hair of the other deer, which helps keep them warm in these very cold environments. They also have wide, hairy hooves, and the hair on that helps give the reindeer a good grip when they're walking on frozen ground, on ice, on mud, and on snow. The reindeer are the only deer species that have hair completely covering their nose as well. And that helps to warm the incoming cold air before it enters their lungs. It also helps them pick up more odors so that they have a really good sense of smell. And that helps them find food that's hidden under snow, as well as locate any sources of danger and recognize what direction they're going in. Reindeer tend to travel into the wind so that they can pick up those scents and navigate based on that. They eat mosses, ferns, herbs, grasses, and the shoots and leaves of shrubs and trees, especially willow and birch trees. In the winter, they can survive just on lichens, or what's called reindeer moss, and fungi. And they will scrape the snow away with their hooves to get to that. So the average adult reindeer does eat between 9 and 18 pounds of vegetation a day, but they can pretty much eat any vegetation that they find. Traditionally, these have always been used as pack animals in Arctic areas, a lot of times for pulling sleds. Again, they can also be used as meat, or for milk, or for their hides, or tallow, which is their fat, or they were traditionally used also for sinew, which was used to sew clothing together with. And reindeer meat is very high in protein. It's about 22% protein and very low in fat at about 3.5%. So compare that to beef. Beef is about 19% protein, 9% fat. And a typical reindeer yields around 120 pounds of meat. So that is a big sector of the industry as well. There's a very high demand to rent reindeer around Christmas time, and they can bring up to $200 to $300 an hour just to rent them, to have them in these Christmas displays. They're also very curious, gentle, social animals. They tend to be very laid back. They spend most of their day lying around chewing their cud, so they tend to also be very easy to train. And one last use is in Scandinavia, they have also developed this sport called skijoring, where the reindeer actually pull people around on skis. So there's very versatile animals, again, with lots of different uses. And all of our animals that we've seen this week, they're a little bit out of the ordinary, but they're all growing in popularity because they are so versatile. So thank you for listening. I hope this has been a fun look into some of our less common livestock species, and we'll see you next week.